saying that, you can have kids who have both a sensory processing disorder and generalised anxiety, and then you just need to treat both of them. So, any questions about anxiety before I move on?
Just with that last slide when you said not covered here, what do you mean by that?
I'm not going to be covering generalised anxiety. That's more of a psychology area, whereas I'm just focusing on sensory processing.
I'm just wondering if sensory processing can be generated in like in an adult, like calls from the car.
So whether sensory processing issues can be caused by a car accident.
Yeah.
If you have brain damage, it can cause a whole range of things, and sensory processing may be part of that, but it would be a secondary sensory processing versus a primary one. So a good example of that actually, my mother, she had a mini stroke, and her balance just went right off, and I treated her as a little kid, and it came back like this. But it was a secondary thing.
So does it ever go?
Sensory processing.
Or is it something you're born with and you learn to deal with it? Or is it something that does go over time?
Both. So sensory processing issues, you will learn to deal with it if the stress around you is not too high, and you tend to work out lots of coping strategies. And as an adult, it's a lot easier to avoid the things that trigger you, whereas a child, you're basically at the mercy of the school, of the teachers, of the family, and you can't usually get away from things as much. So it doesn't really go away, but you can learn to deal with it. And what you'll often find is that with treatment we can actually turn some of it around, but if you let it to run its natural course, you usually just work around it. And so when somebody is stressed, when somebody is really tired, then usually you'll see the symptoms come right up, and then when they're in a good place and they're calm, it'll usually go down again. So it's quite funny, like we have 11 OTs who work here, and probably a good 50% of them have a degree of sensory processing issues, which I think is maybe what attracted them to OT in the first place. And they're still there, but they cope with them. So any other questions before we move on? Alrighty. So about sensory processing, this is how the brain takes away the information from all of the senses, so both within our own body as well as that from the world around us. So within our own body is things like how we move our head, what is happening to our touch, what is happening to our taste. From our world is what is that smell out there? What can I see? What can I hear? Does that make sense? And so it combines all of this information to get an accurate picture of our world. So sensory processing disorder can actually be likened to a neurological traffic jam that happens in our brain. So we've got the lower part of our brain called the midbrain, and it's basically like a pretty huge tunnel. And that's where the sensory processing primarily takes place. And if the messages are getting scrambled, it means that certain parts of the brain don't receive the right information that they need to interpret sensory information and make appropriate decisions. And so just an example there is if they're like the humming of this air conditioner, that will drive maybe some of you bananas, but definitely some of the kids I work with. And they'll be like, and they're so busy focusing on that, and it's scrambling the messages from maybe what the teacher is trying to tell them, or what the work that they're supposed to do. So, sensory processing disorder is actually not a diagnosis that's recognised on the DSM-5. So instead, the more politically correct term is to talk about sensory processing issues. So it's quite funny, sometimes we get referrals from a GP to look at a sensory processing disorder. We're like, So we have 8 senses. Auditory gives us the hearing information, visual, what we see. Now with that, you've got both your focal vision and your peripheral vision. So your peripheral vision is really about alerting you that you need to turn your head and gather more information. So many of our kids are like, what's that, what's that, what's that, what's that? They just can't gather the information they need, and they can't have this imbalance. And then the problem with that is they're not gathering the detailed information that they need to be able to do the work that they need to do. Or to be able to read people's faces and make an appropriate judgment. Because that's a big thing for a lot of our kids. So then we have a vestibular. Big word. This gives us information about movement and gravity. Tactile is information about touch. We have light touch, which is all the tickly touch. Everybody just tickle your arm. Who likes that? Who doesn't? Now press on it firmly. Who likes that? Who doesn't? Yeah. So even among us, there's quite a bit of difference between what our touch preferences are. And so it's really important that we observe and then respect other people's touch preferences. So that's touch. It's really, really common that you'll have kids who love to touch everybody else, but they can't stand being touched themselves. Because if they can control it, they can deal with it. If they can't control it, it's too much for them and causes anxiety.
It's a bit like Temple Grandin's squeeze machine.
Yep. Temple Grandin's squeeze machine gives her lots of control, deep touch pressure that helps settle her whole system. There's other people who absolutely hate that because they can't stand being confined. Proprioception and kinesthesia, that gives us information about our body position. So that's like being able to tie your shoelaces without having to study them. It's being able to do your buttons without looking at them. It's being able to write and copy from the board without looking at every single letter as you go. It's about being able to do your action songs in kindy without bumping other kids and actually being able to keep up. So that's those two. Olfactory and gustatory is information about smell and taste. And then you've got your internal senses, which is hunger, sense of your organs, etc. So how it works is we've got the senses I just discussed. The processing, the brain assembles and organises and filters the information. And then you have your behavioural and emotional responses, your motor development, and your visual perception and cognitive development. And here, this is what we see. We don't actually see what these are doing. And so it's just really quite important that we understand what's underlying it so we know what to do about it. Because otherwise, kids are called, they're just naughty. And that's not very helpful. So the big thing about our senses is that they're dual-coded with emotion. And so, every single experience you have a feeling that's associated. Play-Doh, yuck, I hate that. Orange smell, yuck, I hate that. Finger paint, ooh, smooth, I like that. And the smell of a person, being hugged. All of those things have that memory of emotion associated. And so this is why, remember that diagram I showed you earlier about kids checking out, earlier and earlier? This is why they check out. Because that memory of that emotion just comes up really strong the moment that they're associated with something. And it's important it does that, because imagine if there was a snake and the first time, like, you didn't know how dangerous it was, but once you learned, you have to learn that to stay away from that truly dangerous things. The problem with our kids is they perceive things to be dangerous that actually aren't. And that's because of the emotional experience they have. There's interconnectivity between all the senses. So if you think about your dog you know, whether you have a pet or whether somebody else's. Can you think about the smell? Can you think about the texture of the fur? The size, how heavy his paws are when if he leans on you? That's all the multi-sensory parts, because every single experience we have, we encode it with multiple different sensory parts. So you can tell from the feel of an orange that it's an orange, even if you can't see it or smell it, and so on. The next part is the evaluative and protective function. So is it safe to explore further? And so that's what kids decide. That's safe, that's for me, or that's not safe, or that's boring, or that's hard, that's not for me. Discrimination. What is it like? Gather more information. If a kid has decided that it's not safe or it's not for them, they will not engage in the discrimination and they will not learn. So just an example here, I'm working with another ASD boy who had decided that he was not a writer. He was not a reader. He did not do any schoolwork, thank you very much, and he was 9 years old and he was bright. And so because he had decided that that was the case for him, he literally did nothing. He would sit at school and have a teacher aide trying to pull information out of him, doing nothing. And it's not that he couldn't. He'd actually decided that he wouldn't. And so my therapy was the first part was undoing that. And it's like, it used to be the case, but you're better than that. And yeah, that used to be the case, but you can do that now. And over time, he's turned around and he did like a good 40 minutes of work with me this morning, of writing, of spelling, of rhyming, of hearing middle sounds. It was a very distracted time, but he did it. And he's now starting to, I can work with this discrimination and help him to hear the middle of words, the sort of which is, before he couldn't do that or he wouldn't, but now he can. So that's discrimination, and we see that with pretty much every sense. Relationship and affect factors is really, really important. So if you have a kid who has a good relationship with you, you will be able to get them to do far more with you than somebody who they have decided they don't trust or they don't like. Like at best, they might get cooperative behaviour but with no heart to it. At worst, you'll get outright behaviour. So that's really important. And here it's also important to match your affect to the type of child. So with my kids who like to push limits, they like to be 100% the boss, but they're manipulative about it. So there's no anger or anxiety behind it. They're just really wanting that to control every situation from another motive. So those kids, I tend to be really quite firm with. I've got really scared kids who are scared of absolutely everything. I'm really quite gentle with. So it really varies on what's needed. It also depends on how well I know a child. Like I'm not going to come in really heavy on somebody in the first session. I really need to get to know them and where they're at. And so it's the same with us. Playing my ear. Lovely. Sensory synchrony. So this here is the way that all of the messages from the sensory systems reach us at the same time, or at least they're supposed to. Kids who are having trouble with their sensory system, the messages arrive at different times and it can make it really scrambled for them. And so often you'll see like crazy behaviour, hyperactive behaviour, really unsettled and disjointed. And that's often because this sensory synchrony is way out of whack for them. And using rhythm, timing, predictability helps to get that in sync for them. So are there any questions on that so far? Is it making sense and you can write to your kids? So when sensory processing works well, consistent and reliable information is given to the brain. The information is effectively interpreted and it's automatic. And I really want to point that out because much of the time, our kids are trying so hard to be normal, to fit in, to do what they're told because they want to please us and they want to be good. And so they'll often hold it together at school really, really well. But it's not automatic. And they have to use their thinking to do it. And where their thinking should be used for their work, it's being used to control their body and their behaviour. And so they are just exhausted when they're at home, and they usually let their parents have it. So then, if it's all working, they've got an accurate picture of their world, and they can act appropriately. They interpret what's going on, They can socially problem solve, they can, in the rest of their life, problem solve, and they can choose what to do that's going to be appropriate. So, the link with anxiety is that they're unable to automatically process the information. It's not efficient, it's not automatic, it's exhausting. They can't regulate the incoming information. The task and the situation might be too hard for them. And there's embarrassment and shame kicks in, as well as anxiety. And so most of our kids with sensory processing issues have some degree of anxiety.